to be home. This is home. Our home, this is where our membership is, right here. My pastor is Don. I love Don. I love him as a person. I love him as my pastor. And I know you do too. And I tell you, God listens to Don. I had 5 months of being an AFib. I won't give you all the details, but I will tell you that I went through a lot. Treatments, medications, everything, nothing worked. We were here in May for Carrie's graduation, and at that time, I received I asked Don, I said, would you anoint me? And he did. And I will be 49, and we had a day or two in and a day or two out, but it was back. But I saw it happen. I'm going to need to get that up here if I could. Well, I guess I don't need it, really. The main thing that I saw was that when it started getting better, and I take my EKG every day with the cardia. Monday will be 49 straight days that I've been in NSR, and I thank the Lord for that. And it was not, the doctors do the treating. God does the healing. You know that. And I'm not discounting the treatment I received, but the healing came from God, and I thank Him for it. And I think that Don, the Lord listened to him in His anointing of me. If you have a problem, by the way, I don't believe anointing to be the last rites. It should be the first rite. It should be the first thing we do. If you have anything beyond a hangnail, I'm not talking about that, but I'm talking about if you have any serious illness of any kind, let them anoint. Don't worry about being anointed 100 times if that's what it takes over the period of your life. Don't be worried about that. The Bible says to pray with oil. We have really blown that way out of line, and we don't do it until right down to the last rites. People come in to ask them to say, hey, I'm not a priest. I don't come in and put the final deal on you. We do the anointing early, and I believe in that. By the way, my daughter, Marianne, is the one that gave the story. Some of you don't realize that Marianne is my daughter, Kirk is my son-in-law, and all those beautiful girls are my granddaughters. And we love to be with them. We have a son, John, down at Napa. He teaches at PUC Prep. We have an Amy down near the LA area, and we get to see her when we're out here too. Our son, Jim, lives back in Florida, and we see him often. And I know some of those are watching today. By the way, Marianne, when she made the statement, my daddy will get it for me, she meant that. The best thing I ever heard her say was, as an adult, she wanted something, and she said, I know my daddy will get it for me. You don't know what that did to me. And I know Kirk does the same thing. He takes good care of her. Boy, he is a wonderful husband and father and provider and hard worker. You guys all know that. And we appreciate Kirk so very much. But I want to tell you that as a father, your purpose is to say yes. Let the mother say no. And it really does help, because mothers can get away with no, but fathers can't. And in our family, seriously, Camille and I had talked about it. If our kids wanted to do something, the answer was yes, unless there was a very good reason for a no. And that didn't change. If there was we didn't say yes quickly, we thought it through, and then said yes. But if we said no, there was no changing that. I mean, unless we saw we were wrong, but we normally, if we thought it through, the no had to be a no. But yes for everything, seriously. Yes unless it's wrong. Yes unless it's something we can't do. And and let kids make some mistakes. I learned that from my dad. He taught by letting me make some mistakes. And occasionally they have to make some decisions on their own and learn to be on their own. I thank the Lord for our kids, and they're each one very helpful. Let me get my water here. This sermon may get a little dry, so it's good to be with you. I want to read a statement to you that was just given to me, but I love this statement. When I was talking about this series, first of all, I told Don, I don't want to do it on Sabbath. He said, I want you to do the first one on Sabbath. I did a portion of this series at Pacific Press for their worships, and the Lord blessed us. But I wasn't sure about doing it here, and I did elongate it a little bit because there I only had 4 sessions, and I had to move pretty fast because otherwise they had to start paying overtime to their employees, and they don't like that. This is a statement from Acts of the Apostles, page 572. As those who have spent their lives in the service of Christ draw near to the close of their earthly ministry, they will be impressed by the Holy Spirit to recount the experiences they had and in connection with the work of God. Then she continues, the record of his wonderful dealings with these people, of his great goodness in delivering them from trial. It should be repeated to those who are newly come to the faith, and I should add those that have been around a while as well. God desires the old and tried laborers to stand in their place, doing their part to save men and women from being swept downward by the mighty current of evil. He desires them to keep the armor on till he bids them lay it down. Until he bids them lay it down. We've been through a lot of phases in our life. And the next phase for me will be to lay it down. And last week we had memorial for my brother John. And he's the last living brother that I had. He was actually older than I am. And I realized that I'm next. My father-in-law was a wonderful man, and he lived to be 100 years old. He had a tremendous sense of humor, and he could sucker me in to any kind of story. And one day he said to me, "Well, how's Joe Cruz?" Now he knew Joe had passed away, but I didn't know at the time. I thought, well, his memory's bad. I said, "Dad, Joe's not with us anymore. He's resting, waiting for the resurrection." "Oh, really, Joe?" "Yeah." "How about Bill May?" And he went through this whole bunch of people. Got down to Ron Halverson. He got down to Bob Falkenberg. And he stopped and he paused. And I thought, well, he's going to say that he's next. He said, "Well, I guess you're next." So I love that man. Loved him so much. Turtle on the Fencepost. This is talking about those people that have influenced my life. More than me, it's about them. In fact, this thing's not working here just right yet, but I guess it will, in fact, in time. There we go. All right. The idea of the turtle on the Fencepost. You see, there's a fellow named Alex Haley, wrote book Roots. He had a picture. In fact, he had a picture very similar to this in his office. And people would ask Alex, they would say, "What is the meaning of that picture?" Nothing, just a picture of a turtle. He said, "When you see a turtle on a fence post, you realize he didn't get there by himself." This is extremely important, folks. Whatever we've accomplished or been used by God to do in life, we didn't do it by ourselves. First of all, it was the Lord's leading. Secondly, it was those that He placed in our stead that prepared us for whatever it was. I have never told my story except the partial thing that I did at Pacific Press. In evangelistic meetings, and I've held around 100 evangelistic meetings, every evangelist I know of tells his life story. I never told mine. There were several reasons why. One is that I do not want it to be misunderstood. And that's the main thing. And secondly, I'm more private than you would ever think. There's just some things I don't want to talk about. I don't want to expose them. I don't want to, and there may be good things. But I'm just personal things. And so it's difficult for me to do that. People have asked me, tell your story. Thank you. Maybe someday. When you reach the age that I am now, you realize that if you don't tell it, you won't have much longer to tell it. And I thought of all those stories that have really influenced me. Ron always told his story in his evangelistic meetings. What a story. What an inspiration. I could tell Ron's story. I've heard it so many times, and I've read it so many times, and I've known people that were involved with it so many times. I could tell his story. What a thrilling story. Dale Brusette. Some of you don't know Dale. Some of you do know Dale. Dale, we got really well acquainted with him when Camille and I were teaching in Montana, and we stayed out at the Brusette Ranch, like 50,000-acre ranch, in a little town called Brusette, Montana, where his father had settled and where Dale grew up. And Dale became a famous rodeo rider in that area and quite a character. And went off to the service, had a terrible experience there. Even though he grew up around Adventists, he never really became an Adventist until he came back home. Spent a year in the hospital recovering from injuries in Korea. And then he came back, and somewhere along the line he gave his heart to Jesus. And what a preacher he was. And his story was so thrilling. Doug, boy, what Doug's story. You know, you can't beat Doug's story. I mean, rich guy, and Doug's a wonderful guy. I love his story. I've read his book more than once. And I love his story. But then I'm going to go to this story. And then Sean Boonstra. When Sean told his story, I thought, maybe I should tell mine. Because he was never a gang leader. He was never a rodeo guy that went to war and got hurt. He was never, and I can name some of the other guys, and I'll leave them out of it today. But he was an ordinary guy. But boy, I've heard his story twice. I'd love to hear it again. If he ever comes out here, ask Sean to tell the story of his conversion. Most thrilling thing. It really is. And it wasn't somebody that did something wrong. And then there was Elder Carthage. And this is the one that really impacted my life. Elder Carthage, at the end of his life, you might say, in the latter years, told his story. I got to hear it. And I was so happy that I did. Because God had led so many times in so many ways. He talked about all the different moves that they had made in their lives. And that was a very encouraging thing. And so it made me realize that I wanted to somehow share this. General Patton had a lot of problems, as a lot of us have had through the years, sometimes in getting along with people. And General Patton was busted, you might say, not from being a general, but they took him out of a command. Ike did not want to put him back in the command of the Third Army, but Omar Bradley did. And Omar overruled Eisenhower and put him back in. And the rest is history. And when it was over, Patton said to Bradley, Brad, I have many faults, but ingratitude is not one of them. I would tell you this, I have many faults, but ingratitude is not one of them. I am so grateful to so many for so much, and I thank God for all of those. Our family begins back in Scotland. We were the Gilley family. If you've ever heard of a Gilley suit, that's a suit people put on when they're hunters. Our people were hunters. There are two connotations to Gilley. One part of the family were hunters, and the other were pastors. So there's kind of a dichotomy there. Even though the pastor is often a hunter, hunting those that need to be helped. And then Gilleys when they came to America, there were three brothers, is the best story that we've heard. One went up north to in the New England states. Later, one of the presidents of Harvard was born to a girl who was a Gilley. Of course, he didn't have that name, but his mom was a Gilley. The other went out to St. Louis. From that family, there are a lot of lawyers and there are a lot of accountants, CPAs. The third was the friend that I came. He went to Virginia. His name was Francis Gilley. Out of that group, and by the way, all these fought in the Revolutionary War on the side of this country. And then the thing about Francis' group, they migrated down to Tennessee and eventually to Texas. And from then you have a lot of preachers and horse thieves and musicians. You have all, not necessarily there's a connection between those three. But Mickey Gilley is one of those that came out of that. Our family came from Tennessee, Virginia, Tennessee, and then Texas. This is a monument to our family, not put up by us, but put up by the historical group, by this lady on the left. It's at the cemetery in Bascom. It's to John and Sarah Gilley. They came to Texas in 1834. That's like 12 years before it became a state. And during that time, they helped with the early settlers in East Texas. And they were about 4 grandparents back for me. By the way, this is my brother John, who we just had a memorial for last week. John was very heavy there. Obviously, you can tell that. By the time he passed away, he was very light. The night before he died, I called his room and called his wife, actually. She said, "Oh, Jim, you ought to see him. He looks so good." John would probably rather not look so good and been alive like he was, because he didn't make it through another day. He and I got to talk. I kidded him about his getting down to his playing weight. He was a famous football player in our part of the world. And I told him about getting down to his playing weight. But he didn't make it through this particular illness. 87. Last week would have been his 87th birthday, and we had his memorial service. The Epperson family was my mother. My mother was an Epperson. My father a Gilley, of course. The Epperson family came out of Georgia. Well, I don't know as much about them. My mother did write as much as she could about them. But I do know that there's a tradition that her grandfather had a brother, and the two of them, whether they were twins or just brothers, I'm not quite sure. The one brother in the Civil War fought for the South. Her grandfather went to the North and fought for the North. When he got home, he found he couldn't stay in Georgia any longer. So keeping that kind of secret, he moved to Texas. And that's where he eventually ended up. And my grandfather, Gilley, John Robert Gilley, was a sheriff in Texas. He was shot. I'll tell you more about that some other night of the time, but he was assassinated, and he left 7 children. He was only in his 30s. One was my father, and my father had 6 sisters, 5 younger, 1 older. And my grandmother began then to work. This is not a picture of her then. This is a picture of her much older. She began to work. First of all, she tried farming because she had a little bit of money, not much, but a little bit from insurance when he died. They gave her maybe $500 or something. But she bought some land with it over in Gregg County, which is the county nearby. Good farm land. She made a partnership with my dad's brother. His name was Sam. She didn't realize Sam had some other problems, and the farming did not work out. She sold that property, and she said she thought she reserved the mineral rights. She went to Dallas. It was a very tough time. She was going to educate her children. She worked in an ice cream factory at night, wrapping ice cream sandwiches in the cold. Sat there in the cold all day long. Had to be in the freezer to do that. Then she would stop by Sanger Brothers and also Teich's, the two big department stores there in town, and pick up dresses. In those days, they didn't have ready-made dresses, except that they would pick them up. They would already be cut. They'd be in a box. She would take them home, and at nighttime, she would sit and she would sew these dresses together. She'd take them to work the next day, return those in the evening to Sanger Brothers or to Teich's, and pick up another load, get on the streetcar, and go on back to her home. She did this for a long time until she finally went to work for Sears and Roebuck, heading up their, first just working in the drapery department as a seamstress, and then becoming head of the drapery department. And then they added to her the awning department, and she was head of the awning and drapery department. Hard-working, ambitious lady with very little education. And then she started her own business. And when she started her business, women didn't do that. And when she would write a letter, if she wrote her name, Minnie Louise, she didn't get a lot of response. So she adopted the initials, M.L. Gilley. People would call for Mr. Gilley all the time. And she built a very good business. Not rich, but successful. And able to keep her family going. And then word came that hit oil back in East Texas. Unbelievable. She was just sure that she had reserved half of the mineral rights. And folks, you've never seen anything like these oil wells. There were over 400 oil wells. They would drill them as close together almost as the piano is here from each other. There was no restrictions in those days on where you could put a well. On the land that she had once owned, there were over 400 wells. Over 12 millionaires were made out of that one piece of land because it was right at the heart of the oil wells in the oil field. The East Texas field is one of the largest fields ever in this world, and a very interesting field, still pumping out of those fields. And so they had a celebration. And my brother it was in the land business, he was in oil business. This is an actual map of the territory that she had, with the wells actually being marked. And so they had the celebration, but they found out that the lawyer had not given her half the mineral rights. He had taken them for himself. So now the widow lady had been taken again, and she continued working. As we've looked at that, we felt like that was God's blessing for her not to get that. We've had to struggle all of our lives. My father, my grandmother. My father met my mother. I told you a little bit about her background. Mother was a Methodist. And Mother really loved the Lord. As a little kid, when she'd go to church, Methodist church, she would say, "We're not going to church on the right day." And people would say, "Well, sure we are. Sunday's the seventh day." So, "Oh, really? Look at your calendar." "Oh, well, and then they didn't know how to answer that. Mother thought, why don't Christians keep the seventh-day Sabbath? It's the Sabbath of the Bible. Mom was a Bible student. From the time she was a child, she read the Word. And she knew the Word as well as anybody. She was horrible to have in a Sabbath school class because she would correct you when you were wrong, I guarantee you. Very soft-spoken, very sweet lady, but always not afraid to speak up in a soft, nice way. I had some of the Bible teachers tell us, "Boy, I have to be on my toes when I'm teaching your mom." But Mother and Dad were married, and they lived in a little place in Dallas on Michigan Avenue. There was a family that moved in next to them. This is another one of those providential things that you start to see, and you can look back and see, what if that family had not moved there? The family's name was the Clarks. And when they finished reading the Signs of the Times, they said to my mother, "Would you like to read this?" They'd gotten acquainted. "Oh, yes," and Mom read every bit. Then pretty soon they were giving her the Review and Herald, and they were giving her anything, and then they started giving her Spirit of Prophecy books. My mother loved to read, and she read everything. And finally she said to them, "You know, I believe this." And she went to an evangelistic meeting, and she was baptized. After that, she and my dad, well, actually they were already married and had 2 children, my older brother and older sister, who were like better than 12 years old when I was born. And then, so they had the 2 children. Then they had a third one, the one that we just buried last week. He was 6 years older than I am. That tells you a little bit about where I am. And unless you're poor with math, which I hope you are. But he, for 6 years, he was the baby of the family. And then I was born in this hospital. First child in our family to be born in a hospital. You got to have some kind of a first. And then my mom and my dad, and they were a good mom and dad. My dad was a very moral person. My dad was not an Adventist. He was a Presbyterian. He was one of the most honest men I've ever known. And then I came along at the same time. There was a beautiful girl born over in Tampa, Florida. I had no idea that we were going to have a future together. But we were so happy that very same year. My dad was, he had worked in the awning business. He had worked at Sears, filling orders in the mail order business, worked in the awning business at Sears finally, then went into business with my grandmother. And then he was a very ambitious man. He started his own sales rep firm. And he had 2 lines that were his primary line. One was Porta Cable, which is still out there. This is an old ad we found. And in fact, Daniel found it. Daniel has helped me so much with this. I just thank you so much, Daniel, for that. And then DeWalt saws. Now, we found these old ads. Daniel found them on the internet. You'll still see them at Home Depot. And these are 2 companies that are still there. Dad traveled all of East Texas. Finally, he said, "I'm going to move back to Tyler," which is where he and Mom had first met. And then Mom came to Dallas, and they got reacquainted. And so he went back to Tyler, and that's where our family lived. Now, my grandmother was still the head of the family. She was a strong person. And this is our entire family. Those are all my aunts. They didn't have a whole lot of children. Those aunts were, I guess they'd grown up in a big family, and some of them never had any children at all. 1 or 2 had maybe 1. This is our family. You know, I asked people to pick out my dad. They never did. They usually pick out the fat guy in the middle. He was not my dad. He was, by the way, the head of the Democratic Party in Dallas County. And over to the left, far left, is my father, the tall guy on the left. And this family was a very hard-working, interesting family. My aunts had all worked for the telephone company. And so the telephone company in those days worked on accents. My aunts had no Texas accent at all. Neither did my father. And they had none whatsoever, because they had this Midwestern accent that the telephone company taught them. And they sounded, all the telephone operators sound, "Number please," remember that same tone. That's how they talked all the time. This was my picture. This was Thanksgiving 1944, and I was 4 years old. There was a girl, that's my sister Mary, 12 years older than me. Mary was closer to me than my mother, and I love my mother very much. But my older sister, the only girl in our family, 1 girl, 4 boys, she was like a mother to me. She was 12 when I was born. She took me and took care of me. When I was about 3, there was a great polio epidemic in Texas. Over 400 cases in our city. They've written it up historically because there was only 1 doctor. At the time, the population was 25,000. One doctor. Everybody else was off at war. Dr. C.C. MacDonald. They've written books about this guy. He came to our home. He said he has polio. I have a little damage. The Lord gave me just enough damage to keep me from doing a couple things I might have done otherwise. Maybe be in the Air Force or something like that. And but it has not prohibited me from being involved in all life's activities, including sports eventually. Mary and I were so close. During that polio time, she was like a nurse, and she was planning to be a missionary nurse. That's what she always told us she was going to be. Going to go to Africa and be on a boat and be a missionary nurse. She talked about that a lot. She nursed me. I remember only a little bit of that. But you know something's amazing, folks, if you have something to tie things back to, how much you can remember. You'll be surprised. After only about 3 months, you start actually remembering. People don't think that. All the doctors, oh, you don't. Listen, I know because I can tie it back. For instance, an uncle that came to our home. And when he died, I remember his visit before then. And then when he died, we went to the funeral. And I thought, I must have been 3 or 4 years old. No. When I looked at the date, I was only 18 months old. 18 months old. And I remember that funeral. I remember some of the people that were there, including a friend of mine who happened to be in town at that time. And he was from the same little town we were. He was there to see a doctor. It was right next door, and he saw us, and he came over to the funeral. And I remember that vividly. And I thought, I must have been maybe 3 or 4 years old. The tombstone says I was 18 months old. Sister Mary was so close to me, and I loved her so much. One night, about midnight, we got a telephone call. And my dad answered it. I remember seeing him in the hall. I knew something was wrong immediately. And only one phone in the house, in those days. It was right in the hall. My brother and I slept in my mom's bedroom. We only had a 2-bedroom house. My sister had the other bedroom. My older brothers slept on, they had pull out kind of day beds out in the living room. They slept out there. We slept in the same room with our parents. And I woke up and I saw Dad. I knew something was wrong. I heard Mom start to cry. I went and crawled into bed with Mom, hugged her. And then I listened. My dad said, just a moment. He hung up. Then he called back. He said, this is the highway patrol. They said, yes. Did you just call me? Yes. I wanted to make sure it wasn't a crank call, because sometimes the kids would play a crank call, And my sister had been killed. The car that she and her friends were in had been in a minor accident. And a drunk came over the hill running 80 miles an hour, ran into their car, killed my sister and the boy that she was with. Good kid. Killed them both. That was a horrible time, folks. Horrible. I remember the funeral. I kept thinking I wouldn't cry. I wasn't going to cry. I said no, because I knew that Jesus was going to resurrect her. And that because of that, my dad was becoming an Adventist. And really, in my mind, this is what was going on. I remember it vividly. And I was waiting through the service. I know it's going to happen. I don't know when, but it's going to happen. And all of these people, it was unbelievable. She'd been very popular in the high school. Had been head of everything. Now she was in the junior college. She'd gone off to our school for a while, and we ran out of money, and she'd come home and was going to the local junior college. And all those students were out there. And outside the funeral home packed. Hundreds of kids standing outside with speakers out there. In the rain, they were standing there. And I thought, this is so wonderful. It's going to happen. They finished the viewing out in the auditorium, and they brought her into the family room. My dad lifted me up because I was 7 years old. I could see, but not real well. He lifted me up. And I thought, this is when it's going to happen. And about that time, they started to close the lid. I said, no, wait. And they said, no, we have to. And the tears shot, hot tears. I'll never forget them, shot out of my eyes, probably even on her body. My tears. I was heartbroken. And I realized it wasn't going to happen till the resurrection. I knew I'd see her again someday. Not long ago, I was talking to a friend of mine. He said, you've never processed that, have you? I mentioned it to my brother. He said, none of us ever processed it. We never got over it. We loved her so dearly. She was so much fun. She was so wonderful, so good. She used to protect me from my older brothers who I was sure were trying to kill me. And she was my protector. And now she was gone. And life began to change for us. I was going to church school at the time. I remember when I went to church school the first day, I wasn't even supposed to start school. I was 5 years old. My older brother, was in like the 7th grade, and they were enrolling him. And I found a little desk. There were only 6 kids in the school. I found a little desk and sat down. And when Mom got through, she said, come on, let's go. And I said, I don't want to go. I want to stay here. And the teacher, Mrs. Jenkins, another one of those people that God puts in your place in a way that makes an impact on your life. My first grade teacher, tremendous teacher. Years later, when I wrote my first book, I sent her a copy, and she gave me an A. And she was really 100 years old, sharp as a tack, sharp as she could be. And I talked to her on the phone, and it was great to talk to her. She said, well, leave him here. If he gets tired, I'll call you. You can come get him. I never got tired until I was a teenager. And then school then became quite a deal. Met some guys there, Dan Buckingham, George Seabury, and some of the ones. And then later on, I had Jenkins, and then I had Sarah Martinez, another wonderful teacher, and actually a historical teacher in the Southwest. She's a legend. And then Harry Holder. Harry Holder was the other people, they were ladies, but Holder was a guy. All of a sudden, I saw somebody that was a real man. He had played high school football, given his heart to the Lord, came to college, only had 1 year of college, and they put him out to teach. And he was a fabulous teacher. He went back later on. He had an unfortunate divorce. He married a girl in our town, and it didn't last. And in those days, there had to be somebody with a fault. They'd find one fault, and he took the blame. Sad. It's very sad. And went out into public school teaching, and for the most part did not remain an Adventist. He did in his mind, but not on the records. 1958, some years later, Life magazine named him Teacher of the Year. Most fantastic teacher any human being could have ever had. And I had the privilege of having him. I thank God for that. I don't think he just put Harry there for me, but I do believe that he used Harry to help me. Harry held a little meeting in the church, and this is the group of people that he baptized. 3 boys in the front, Dan Buckingham, George Seabury, and Jimmy Gilley. Misspelled my name. I never went by Jimmy, particularly not with an I-E. That's how the girls spell it, That was the record. Somebody sent that to me not long ago, and it was just a photostatic copy. Church school closed the next year. Not enough students, and I was transferred to a public school, Birdwell Elementary. And I loved the school. I loved the teachers. They had good Christian teachers. They weren't Adventists. They were good Christian teachers. But while I was there, in the 5th grade, they started in Texas Little League Baseball. Just started. It had been started first up in Pennsylvania, and then now they started in Texas. And our area was one of the first to do it. And so I was made a captain of the team. I was not a good ball player at that point, by any means. But in time, I developed into a pretty good ball player. We won our championship 4 years in a row. Mr. Hickman was our coach. Mac read one of my books. In fact, Mac Googled himself not long ago. He called me. I hadn't heard from him in a long time, over 50 years. And Mac said, I just Googled myself and I found that you mentioned my father in the book. And he said, I just am excited about that. So we had a good visit. By the way, Mac went to church with me one time. His folks let him stay with us while they went on a trip. And took him to church, and they had communion that day. He said, I've never forgot that you washed my feet. He said, I've never had anybody ever do that. And I've never forgotten it. So I was so much involved with baseball that I was not going to ever become an Adventist. I was just waiting. And our family either had to go to church with Dad or Mom. Our older family was probably already going to church when they did go with Dad. He had to go to church till he was 16. And I was nowhere near that. I get word that Fortis Dedamore is coming to town. Now, Fortis Dedamore went to big cities. He didn't come to towns the size of Tyler. He'd had a big meeting set up in one of the large cities in the Southwestern Union. And just before, 2 weeks before, the pastor took a call to another district. So now that campaign was off. Fortis had no place to go. He thought, why did this happen? And then he runs into, at the workers' meeting, Elder C.B. Messer, who had been a classmate of his, says, come to Tyler. It's a nice town. It was a nice town. It had a small church, 27 members. Fortis said yes because they'd gone to school together. He knew him real well. When he got there, he was so disappointed. So disappointed. He was ready to preach, but I was not ready to listen. I told my mom, I'm not going to those meetings. She said, yes, you are. I said, Mom, we're in the playoffs. I got to play baseball. I'm playing baseball. And I said, we've lost a couple of players, and we can't afford to lose any player. She said, all right, if you have a game, you don't have a game every night. I said, every night we don't have a game, we practice. She said, you tell your coach you won't be at practice, but you'll be there for the game. I won't keep you from the game, but you will not be at practice. You will. I said, Mom, I don't want to go. She said, if you will go to every one of these meetings, when they're over with, if you don't want to be an Adventist and don't want to go to church, then you don't have to go anymore. I said, whoa, wait a minute. I'm 14. That's going to cut 2 years off this going to church thing. I said, you mean I don't have to go to church anymore? She said, no, you don't. I knew Mom would keep her word. She was very good about that. I said, okay. First night when I went, Fortis Dedamore was unbelievable. Now, you see, I see this as one of those things that God used. That meeting canceled just at that time. You cannot imagine, I don't want to go in detail, but the timing of this, just before school would start, just before I would go to the 9th grade, just before I'd be the starting quarterback on that team, just before, Dedamore comes to town. And he has a cancellation. He wasn't supposed to come there. You know, you start to have to see. Remember that the Lord said to Jeremiah, before you were born, listen, He is interested in you. Every one of you. As I'm talking about this, I don't want you to think about me. Think about you and how God has led you. How He has been with you. I I believe with all my heart that God does special things. And if we follow those things and make those right decisions at the right time, that it makes a big difference in our lives. Fortis came to town. I really liked him right off. I remember he got to our church on Sabbath morning, and he tore the church up. He said, "This place is filthy. I will not bring people into here." He said, "You could draw a crop over there on that windowsill." He said, "That piano looks like," it had an old upright piano. He says, "That piano looks like Noah's wife had it in the ark. And maybe it fell overboard," he said. And then he went on and on about this type of thing. And then he started that meeting on Sunday night. I sat down and I heard him preach. I can still remember the subject, our shattered world. And then he had all these different things. The political world, shattered. Financial world, shattered. Family world, shattered. All the way down, educational world, every part of our lives, a shattered. It preached today, even more convincingly today than it did then. Now, Fortis had a wired lapel mic. Ray Turner would sit back here. And by the way, Ray Turner could really sing. When he sang Deep River that night, he had this great big RCA microphone that would sit over here to the side, and he would sing in front of it. He had been the first bass singer for the King's Heralds, and he was a wonderful singer. And I'll show you his picture in a minute. But Fortis would run up and down, and Ray would feed this cord out. It didn't have wireless like I've got. He had the cord, and Ray would sit here, and he would feed the cord out, and then he'd bring him back in so he didn't trip up in it. And Fortis would preach. Man, he could preach. He could really preach. And by the way, one of the kids said, "You know, Mom," little kid, "that man runs on electricity," because he had that cord. And so anyway, when it was over, I went up to see that microphone. I wanted to talk to Ray Turner. And he showed me the mic. And I went out to the side. And my brother Paul, Dan Buckingham, another friend, David Hughes, they were standing outside. They said, "We're going to be preachers. What about you?" I said, No, I'm not going to be a preacher. I'm going to be a ball player." But right that many moment, I knew that someday, somehow, some way, I'd be sharing the message that I'd heard that night. Fortis, what a guy. And then Ray Turner was along. Ray, wonderful man. We went through that whole series. Later on, Ray told me, he said when the series was over, they didn't baptize very many people. Just my younger brother Paul was baptized. There was a husband of a lady in the church that was baptized. And hardly any new people. People do not realize a town like Tyler is the most prejudiced town in the world. You think the Bible Belt, folks, don't kid yourself. The Bible Belt's full of Baptists and Church of Christ, and they do not like Adventists because they can't accept the fact that of the Sabbath. It's just simply that cruel. They want to. It's like my brother said. The Baptists are determined to get rid of the Sabbath and to clean up the pig. That's their whole message, just to do that. I said, and by the way, he was a Baptist, but he. It is amazing how hard it is there, and it was very hard in those days. Now, up in some of the towns like Dallas and so forth, they did better. Most of the growth in that part of the country came from people that moved in, not from actually baptizing the people. But Ray told me, he said, Fortis cried for 3 days after that meeting. Now, he didn't mean totally cried for 3 days, but he wondered, Lord, why did you send me there? Why did you send me there? Years later, when I was a young evangelist, I had the privilege of spending a couple of days with Fortis at a meeting in San Diego. I went to his class on Sunday morning. He always had a class throughout his meetings teaching preachers. When it was over, he said, "You're visiting with me today." I said, "What about the pastor?" He said, "He's got another wedding, working on a wedding or something." He said, "You're with me today." most educational day of my life working with Fortis Denimore. And somewhere along the afternoon, he said, Jim, he told me about his disappointment with that meeting. He said, now I know why God sent me there. He said, I was not supposed to be there, but he sent me there to get you. This man, Roger Holly, was part of the team. Roger Holly came to our house and he said to my dad had a business there in Tyler, but he sold it. And then eventually his mother was not doing real well. She was getting up in age. The business had gotten in trouble in Dallas financially, and he knew that, and she called him to come back. And so he did. But we kept living in Tyler, and he would drive up during the week, go up early Monday morning, come back late Friday afternoon, and he would stay there all week long. Elder Holly knew this, and he said to my mother, you need to get these boys out of here. You're going to lose these boys if you don't get them out of here. And Mother said, yeah, but Tyler is a wonderful town, and Dallas is an evil town. And she was right. He said, yes, ma'am. He said, Tyler's a wonderful town with no church school. Dallas is a horrible town with a very good church school. And he talked my mom into moving. Boy, that was some talk, I guarantee you. And I remember we moved on Labor Day. And our pickup, another pickup, we looked like the Beverly Hillbillies probably. But we went to town, and eventually, when I got there, I met this guy in Dallas. And some of those people in the Dallas church, this guy, by the way, impacted my life several times. But he was our youth pastor. He was the assistant pastor of the church. He was in charge of the youth. And he just took me under his wing. He wouldn't let me. One time I was so discouraged, I wanted to, because I came into the church. My dad was a smoker. That's what really kept him from being an Adventist more than anything. He started smoking when he was 12 years old, and he killed him when he was 57. But this guy defended me. I walked into the church. I'd been in the car with my dad. The window showed up, and one of the deacons came up and said, how dare you come in here? You've been smoking. I said, man, I never smoked anything in my life. Oh, man, it was upset me. Yes, you have. Don't lie to me. And I turned around and I left. I was leaving when Pastor Barron saw me. He said, he was coming up the sidewalk. I'm coming up. Where are you going? And I told him. He said, come on. He said, that old man runs off people more than we can bring them in. He said, don't pay attention to him. We lived in this house on 5546 Belmont. And then and by the way, I've met so many people in Dallas, students, that impacted my life. Henry Barron definitely, but there were students, guys like Jim Root, and the Fry brothers, and Galen Carruth, and on. These guys have been lifelong friends, particularly like Jim Root. We're still in touch almost a daily basis. Then I went down to Keene. There were teachers there that God used to impact my life. Lawrence Scales, so what a preacher. What a man. He was our pastor first, then they made him president of the college. Wonderful guy. By the way, he later died while he was at PUC. He's the only person I know of that has two buildings named after him, other than Ellen White, maybe J. N. Andrews, but the only contemporary that has two buildings named after him on college campuses. There's a Scales Hall at Keene and one at PUC. What a man. Altus Hayes. Altus was a person that he encouraged me in so many ways. Crawford was the assistant businessman, never had any money. Showed up one year in debt and only had $3, and interest fee was $200. He said, do you have the debt? I said, to pay. I said, no, I don't. He said, do you have the $200? I said, no. He said, how much do you have? I said, I've got $3 and I need a haircut. He said, yeah, you do, so go get one. So then M.D. Lewis taught me theology, and also he taught me preaching. Now, his theology, he and I didn't always agree on theology, and he didn't agree with anybody on some of these things. But what a Bible student, and a student of the spirit of prophecy. He gave us a love. This lady, I ran into some conflict in my last year there with the dean, and the dean said, we don't want you here anymore. And technically in those days, if you weren't in the dorm, you were out. Elder Scales made an exception in my case and let me stay at her house. And so I stayed at her house until I graduated. But this guy, Captain Blackburn, C.C. Blackburn, he was in charge of phys ed, but also in charge of MCC. And I was in MCC 3 of the 4 years that I was there. In the last year, I was made first sergeant, and I learned more about management and anticipating problems. When you have 180 guys in your company, that's what I had, and you've got to know what they're going to be doing an hour from now, 30 minutes from now, 2 hours from now. You've got to be thinking ahead. And he taught me the phrase, anticipating problems. Now, my wife calls it worry. But God has used this so many times to keep me from making bad decisions. And then at Keene, I got involved with the amateur hour. The reason I did was they gave money. And I didn't have any money. I never had any money at all. I won $25 that night doing a reading, what it was with football. That was an Andy Griffith reading. It was back last October, if you remember, some of you remember that. And it was what propelled him into the spotlight. This reading, I thought at the time I did it just for the $25. Later on, Hayes and also Elder Lickey, the choir director, Mr. Lickey, had me do a lot of stuff when I was on the choir. I got in on the choir when I was a junior in academy and was there all the way through the junior college, had academy and a junior college. And they would have me do this reading. And one night in Houston, Texas, I was doing this reading. And I had always thought there's no way I could ever preach, no way I could get up in front of people and preach, no way I'd have anything to say, and no way I could say it. And that night, while I was doing this in Houston, I remember it just like it was yesterday. The Lord did not audibly speak to me, but in my heart, He said, Jim, if you'll get your material down the way you've got this down, you can preach. First time in my life I ever thought about being a preacher. Now, my pastor, Elder Leighton Holly, who was was there in Dallas, had said to me one time, we were actually both in a bathroom at the time at the camp meeting. I believe God's calling you to the ministry. Nobody had ever said that to me before. Only a few weeks before, he told me they were going to have to kick me out of school. Not for being bad, but for being disruptive and mischievous and having too much fun. And now he was telling me that I was possibly going to be a pastor. I was still involved with baseball. This was our baseball team. I'm the guy with the black sleeves and the black hat over the front row. And we beat the village team that had beaten the dorm team 13 years in a row, and we stopped their dominance. The Lord, I don't know, not the Lord, but we worked hard at it, and we finally won that game. These two guys, big time in my life. Henry, you've seen earlier, but Dick Barron, he was later killed in a tragic private plane accident. He was the pilot. But they allowed me to go down to Texas City and live and stay in the tent, be the tent master, and help them with some meetings. And later, go to Wichita Falls along with this guy, HMS Richards Jr., who was the pastor in Wichita Falls. And these men, knowing them, being close to them, having them encourage me and instruct me, made such a big difference. Richards loved to sing quartet. I first got acquainted with him at camp meeting. Henry pulled me into the group. I sang second tenor. Henry sang first tenor. A guy named Don Duncan sang baritone, and Richard sang bass. And we knew all of the spirituals at the cathedrals, which was a black choir from Oakwood would sing. It was fun. Richards later impacted my life several times. and particularly in my becoming an evangelist. Then what the summer between my first year of college and my second year of college, I was asked to help in these meetings. This really was another turning point in my life. Earlier that summer, I'd been at camp meeting. I'd been very discouraged. And I remember that I was sitting out on the campground. I wasn't in the meeting. I was waiting for some friends on Friday night. And Elder Strickland, the pastor, assistant pastor of the college church, came by and he said, what are you doing here? I said, I'm thinking. He said, what? I said, you know something? I have a chance to play professional baseball. I've had a tryout, and I've been signed by the Giants. I said, I love baseball, but I know that I can't play baseball and be an Adventist. And I said, I'm sitting here thinking I'm going to lose out on this world, and I'm not going to be saved. Who am I kidding? I know me. I know there's no way. And he began to explain some things to me. I said, where do you get that? I said, we don't get that in class. They've never told us. It was always faith plus works. But there was nothing in there about what you're talking about. I said, where'd you get that? He said, from the book Christ Our Righteousness. I went home that night, and I stayed through the camp meeting that weekend. I went home. The next Friday night, I was thinking about getting in the car and maybe driving around a little bit or something. And I said to my mom, do we have the book Christ Our Righteousness? She said, never heard of it. We had a very small library. Mom was read from the public library, or she read the Spirit of Prophecy books and the Bible, but we didn't have very many other books. So I said, Mom, you sure? She said, no, I've never heard of the book. I don't know why, but I kept looking in the little bit of library, and down on the bottom shelf, wrapped in brown paper, like they did in those days, they would stamp the title on the end. I reached it. I don't know. I knew before I even reached that book that it was Christ Our Righteousness. I read that book through 8 times before I read anything else. I shared it with several other people, changed their lives. These are the compilation of Ellen White on salvation. Christ Our Righteousness. A.G. Daniels put it together, the man who was longest in there. And then I went back to school. Now, when I got to college, there was a girl that I really thought a lot of, and eventually we got real serious. The night I won the amateur hour in my first year of college, singing "Old Man River" of all songs, and the prize was $125. I mean, I was really excited. That's the most money I ever had in my life. And the next day, I was so depressed, I wanted to quit. I went into Elder Scales. I said, I'm going to quit. He said, why? I said, I just don't like it around here anymore. I said, no money. I don't have the money. My grades are not all that hot. He said, your grades have never been all that hot. He said, you've always owed us money. And I said, yeah, but I don't like even the food in the cafeteria. He said, you've been able to do pretty good. I was really skinny in those days. As tall as I am, maybe a little taller than I am now, I've shrunk. And I weighed about 150 pounds. And he looked at me and he says, is it because you've broken up with your girlfriend? And I said, how'd you know? He said, everybody knows. That made me feel good, yeah. I said, Elder Scales, I can't handle it anymore. I can't stand, I can't eat, I can't do anything, can't even concentrate. I said, I gotta get out of here. He said, I had a drop voucher, and he had to be the one to sign it because I had more than one subject on it. He said, Gilley, I'm going to leave this right here, right on that desk, that very desk. He said, I'm going to leave it right here. And he said, you just get out of here for a week and come back. He said, if you still want me to sign it, I will at the end of the week. I left and went. I wasn't about to go home because my mother liked this girl. And she would say, "What did you do wrong?" I'd get the blame. I knew that. And probably should have been blamed too. Anyhow, I went down to East Texas to my brother Ed's house. And I stayed with Ed. And we played some golf. He played good golf. I barely got by. I read some philosophy. I read scripture. I visited with another friend. And when I came back the next Monday, I told him, I said, "You can tear that drop voucher up. If anybody leaves this campus, she's going to leave this campus." And I set about, it's a defense mechanism. You recognize that. I set about to make her just as miserable as I could. I wouldn't speak to her. If I'd had a watch, and I couldn't afford one, I would have never even given her the time of day. And now these teachers really believed in us. And Elder M.D. Lewis asked me to go sing at a funeral. I said, "Have you got somebody to play?" He said, "Yeah, I got somebody. Don't worry about that." I said, He said, "Don't worry about that." Well, when I get to the car to go, he's got this girl there. And so then she played for me, and I sang at the funeral. On the way back, he said, "We're going to stop at a Chinese restaurant there in Fort Worth, the Blue Moon, I think it was called. And I'm going to call my wife to meet us." And boy, we enjoyed some wonderful Chinese food. Anything was better than the cafeteria food, but this was excellent. It really was good. But we still didn't get together. And one night I got a call from Evelyn West, who was the Dean of Ladies. I wish I had a picture of her here. And I said, she said to me, "You get over here. There's a girl I need you to talk to." I said, "I don't want to talk to her." She said, "If you don't come over here, don't you ever darken this door again to pick up any of my girls." Because, you had to go to the dorm to get the girl. If you're just going to a concert or something, on the campus. And so I said, "Okay, I'll come over." They had a little date room, they called it. It had it was a room full of windows. I mean, I would have called it more of like a fish aquarium or something. And we went in there, and we got things settled. And we had a wedding. See, that girl meant a lot to me. These are my brothers standing there with me. That's my brother Ed first. My brother John, we just buried. See, he wasn't always that heavy. My brother Paul, who we buried a number of years ago. Wonderful guys. Wonderful, wonderful brothers. Camille's dad is performing the wedding. You can see him just over my shoulder there. And then here we are as we left to head out to the reception, and got off on a wrong foot right there on diet. I can tell you that. But anyway, and then we dressed to leave. Life began for me right there. Up to then, I was living, but I was not really living. This woman, God used her. He brought her. When I was 15 years old, I prayed, "Lord, bring me the right one." I remember the night very well. It was at 5546 Belmont. I was out on the porch because I didn't have a bedroom anymore. We were renting my bedroom out, trying to get a little money to go to school. And I didn't have a bedroom, so I slept out on the porch when I came home. Screened-in porch. Wintertime, I just pull a tarp over me, and there was a couple of blankets, and sleep out there. Unless my brother let me sleep with him, and sometimes one of them would. Anyhow, I prayed, Lord. I was looking at the moon that night. It's the craziest thought. I said, somewhere there's a girl looking at that moon, and it's one that you want for me. Help me prepare a girl for me, Lord. For a woman that'll put up with me, a woman that'll love me, a woman that I'll love, a woman that'll excite me. Everything. Still the most exciting girl in the world to me. And I said, please. I was 15. I never thought. I said, let me know when I see her. I never thought that any girl I ever saw was this girl. And then I heard there was a new girl on the campus at Keene, and midway through our senior year, she'd been in Ozark, and her dad had taken a pastoral call down in Houston, and for the conference to give them help and so forth. And because of her own decision, she had transferred, even in her senior year, down to Keene. And I kept looking for the new girl. I was in L.C. Evans Hall, a hall they recently tore down. I saw a picture of it there, but I thought, I'm not going to bore them with all these things. Coming down the pike, I saw her. I held the door open for her. I said, hi. She said she spoke back. I know she didn't. But it's the first time in my life I'd ever thought, Lord, I wonder, is that the girl? I didn't know it was the girl, but I did ask the question, is that the girl? As I got to know her, my mother fell in love with her the first time she met her, and she said, that's the girl for you. And thank the Lord, her mother fell in love with me. Because if her mother hadn't, I don't think she'd ever married me. And but then the Lord did work this out. Let me tell you, if I went back through all these things, you see where God led in each one of these things. It's just not, folks, there are no coincidences in life. There are none. You think there are. I've never found a real true coincidence yet. They are the leading of God. Now, I'm not thinking what you to think about me. Think about you and how God has led you. How He has led you, how He's protected you, and how He loves you, how He wants to be your friend. I walked life's path with an easy tread. I wondered where pleasures and riches led, until one day in a quiet place, I met the Master face to face. I met Him and knew Him and blushed to see that His eyes, full of love and mercy, were fixed upon me. And then I turned my eyes upon Jesus, looked full in His wonderful face, and the things of earth grew strangely dim in the light of His glory and grace. We're not going to sing the whole song. Just the chorus, a cappella, or piano, either one, but turn your eyes upon Jesus. Look full in His wonderful face, and the things of earth will grow strangely dim in the light of His glory and grace. Father in heaven, we look at ourselves, we don't know how in the world we could ever be saved. We don't know how in the world you could ever use us in any way. But when we look at you, we realize that it's only through the blood of Jesus. But through that blood, you can just take very ordinary people, Lord, and do some extraordinary things. There are people here today, Lord, that have been somehow struggling with their own experience. Help them just to commit their lives to you. They're not going to be perfect. I wish they were. I wish I were. But when I read Matthew 5, I see the intensity of sin in our lives. How that just an attitude, pride. Ellen White, your servant here, speaks about the most insidious pride of all, the pride of opinion, and how we need to sacrifice that. Father, we just fall so short of you, and you want us to be you, and so it's through you that we're saved. And I thank you, Father. It's through you that we have victory in our lives. It's through you that change comes. Help us to watch for the providences that come. And then to move on those providences is our prayer. And now may the Lord bless you and keep you. May the Lord be gracious unto you. May the Lord lift up his countenance unto you and give you peace both now and forevermore. Amen.